You're listening to Nutrition Matters Podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Hey everyone, it's Paige, your favorite nutrition podcaster and dietitian. Nutrition Matters Podcast explores what really matters in nutrition and health with a sensitive and realistic approach. This podcast relies on the support of listeners like you and needs donations to keep this project running. To help support the podcast, please consider making a donation at pagesmothersrd.com/podcast. If you find this episode interesting, engaging, or helpful in your life, please consider donating, sharing with friends and family, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can leave a review about this podcast straight from your podcast app. Search Nutrition Matters Podcast, click Reviews, and then write a review. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Paige Smathers RD if you'd like to have a little more food for thought. Thank you for listening. Hi everyone, it's Paige, and welcome to Nutrition Matters Podcast. As always, I'm excited you're here, and I'm excited to share with you one of the episodes that I recorded way back when this podcast was brand new. As many of you know, a couple months ago, I went in and deleted the first 30 or so episodes from the queue. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of resurrecting, for lack of a better term, the best of the best that I've just really loved of the earlier interviews that I did. And I'm kind of retiring the ones that didn't stand out as much or that kind of didn't feel as pertinent to my audience. And so this was one of those episodes that I did early on that I just left the interview feeling so uplifted, so educated, and so just encouraged about recovery and about men, and just so grateful for this wonderful person who was willing to share his story with the world in his book and also with my audience here on the podcast. So yeah, I'm really excited for you to tune into this. Now you might be thinking, okay, I'm not a man, and so therefore this won't have anything to do with me. Or you might be wondering, if this particular podcast will be of interest to you. And I really encourage you to listen, because I think we all do better when we learn from each other. And Andrew has so many great thoughts in this episode. So let me just quickly let you know about a few upcoming events. The first is the Mindful Eating Workshop that I am putting on in the spring on April 7th in Salt Lake City. And I'm so excited about this. This is going to be taught by me, as well as Noah Rasheta, who is a mindfulness teacher and host of the Secular Buddhism podcast, which is incredibly popular, has tons and tons of listeners, and he does such a great job with it. So we're teaming up and we're putting on this mindful eating workshop that I'm so excited about. So check out the website for it to see if it might be a good fit for you and to see if you'd like to buy tickets and join us. That is mindfuleatingworkshop.com. Another thing I just wanted to say is thank you so much to each and every one of you who are leaving reviews and sharing the podcast with your friends and family and or followers on social media. It's so appreciated, and I've just felt a kind of renewed sense of encouragement over the last few weeks and months with all of the sharing I've been seeing. And it just, I know it kind of sounds silly, but it just means a lot to me to know that this is reaching people and helping people, and that all of the work that I do to put this on is worth it. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it, and keep it coming. If you'd like to join us for more conversations about these topics off air, join us in the Nutrition Matters podcast community on Facebook. We'd love to see you there. And then the last thing is, really want to encourage all of you to check out my online course to see if it might be a good fit for you. You can find more details, pagesmothersrd.com/course. And this is a 10-week online interactive course with lessons and assignments and reflective opportunities, and a lot of opportunity for growth and introspection, a lot of involvement with me as the course instructor. And in the Facebook group that we have for the course, there's a lot of one-on-one and kind of group encouragement and questions answered and discussed. And so if you're looking to take healing your relationship with food to the next level, if you'd like to really get into the nitty-gritty of how to make this happen in your own life, I'd really encourage you to check it out. So So yeah, head on over to paigesmathersrd.com/course. Okay, thanks so much for being here as always, and enjoy this episode with Andrew Wallen. So Andrew is the founder and executive director of the Body Image Therapy Center in Columbia, Maryland. He is a psychotherapist specializing in eating disorders, substance abuse, body image, anxiety and depression, self-harm, and self-esteem. He's an active author, speaker, and advocate on these issues as well. Mr. Wallen currently serves on the board of directors for the National Association for Males with Eating Disorders. He has appeared on the Today Show, was featured in the New York Times, and interviewed on television and radio stations in the Baltimore, D.C. area as an expert in the field of eating disorders. Mr. Wallen is a magna cum laude graduate from the University of Tennessee College of Social Work in Nashville. He's also a published singer-songwriter and performs regionally. All right, Andrew, is there anything you'd add to that, or is that a pretty good basic description of you before we begin in your real story?
Yeah, that's a pretty good description. I'm just also thrilled to say we're opening up our second location in Washington, D.C.
How exciting!
Yeah.
That's
so
great.
A busy time right now.
So tell us a little bit more about what you do professionally, and then we'll get into some of your history and your story.
Sure. So I am, as you said, the executive director and founder of the Body Image Therapy Center. And we started out, it was just my little private practice in Baltimore, Maryland, and was really wanting to have a group practice where team experience that I think is so critical to recovery from an eating disorder. So started out just slowly, a couple of clinicians, and the next thing you know, we've got dietitians, we've got psychiatry, we've got, we build and decide, you know what, I think we need an IOP, an intensive outpatient program. So wait, let's build that. And just sort of naivete got me through, the scariest parts of all of this. Not knowing really what I was setting myself up for, but we've got such a great group of folks right now, and saw that there was a donut hole of services in DC, and lots of great private practice clinicians, but no facilities or higher level of care. So figured I'll jump in there, and so a year later we open next week.
That is so exciting.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, so it's been exciting, and along with that, realized that males with eating disorders do not have much of a voice, and so when I felt it was appropriate, and I had enough time and energy, and I started to write my book called Man Up to Eating Disorders. And hey, it got there.
You know what? This book got here yesterday, and I powered through it in one day. And it's that good. I'm serious.
Oh, thank you.
Your story, I mean, this probably is going to sound so cliche, but I don't even care. It made me cry and crack up like in the same chapter, just multiple times. It was so well written and such an interesting story. And I know you wrote it for men, but I think women would totally relate to your story too. So
thank you.
And by way of kind of further introducing this topic and this episode of this podcast, I just want to say that the big impetus for having Andrew here is because I feel I'm coming from a perspective of trying to really be sensitive to women's issues, especially in my own life. I think there's a lot of, unfair situations for women. However, I think in this particular area, when we're talking about food and body image and eating disorders, we are so unfair to the men and the boys in our life who struggle. And so I've tried to be sensitive to this so far, but this is the first time that we're able to really have a voice to understanding what eating issues, eating disorders, disordered eating, body image struggles are like from a man's perspective or from a boy's perspective. And I think that this is just crucial and totally underserved population. So I'm really excited you're here.
Well, thank you. I don't know if you saw, there was a post going out with from Dr. Ed Tyson, if you're familiar with Dr. Tyson, the noted eating disorders physician. And it was on Facebook, and it was a comment on how few doctors get involved with eating disorders. And that led to a whole lot of folks who were commenting on how sad it is and why there's so much stigma around eating disorders. And what kept coming up in the article that he posted and the comments underneath of it was young women need to young women with anorexia and bulimia . And one person very appropriately said, and let's not forget about binge eating disorder. And then I felt I had to chime in, hey, let's not forget about men.
Right.
And, but that is the ongoing problem within the eating disorders awareness campaign, is male issues, binge eating disorder issues, age diversity, socioeconomic diversity. I mean, we are still stuck in a cultural awareness that eating disorders are an anorexic young white female. And it's really much more than that. And we'll talk about, the latest statistics, but
well, and would you mind getting into that? I was looking that up from your book too. So, will you tell us the latest statistics about men with eating disorders so that we can kind of start off on the right foot?
Absolutely. So there have been several research studies that go back 10, even 15 years that are showing the rate of eating disorders of anorexia and bulimia in males are at least 30%, maybe even higher. Some studies show 40%.
30% of the total population of
the
people
total of the population of those diagnosed with an eating disorder.
Right.
Yeah. Now with binge eating disorder, that number is more like 40% and probably even higher due to underreporting there. There was one research study that came out of Europe last year that I saw in the Academy for Eating Disorders, showed that teen boys ages 13 to 18 were diagnosed with anorexia at the same rate as females, a 1-to-1 ratio. So, and that's probably more along what I'm seeing in my own practice as, people know that, in our clinic, this is where males can get treatment by someone who really understands males with eating disorders, and they're coming in adult and teenager at ever increasing numbers. It used to be I had 1 out of 20 cases, and that's now more like 1 out of 3 cases, which is much more along the lines of what the national study shows. So, again, why is that? Is that because they finally feel safe to come out and get help? Are they being diagnosed at just that greater rate? I mean, we'll never really know, but that's the reality of it.
But the point is they're getting help and they're feeling comfortable to reach out, which is better than a lot of areas in the country and probably in the world. So you're doing great work there. I'm really excited for you in that new location. That's great.
Thank you.
So let's just get a few misconceptions out of the way here, and forgive me if this sounds totally rude, but I actually just talked this over with my family when my family was visiting this weekend, and I told them that I was going to be interviewing you, and they said, men with eating disorders. So you're saying like it's a lot of gay guys. It must just be, so a lot of misinformation and judgment. So let's just get all of that out of the way and talk about what's true there.
All right. So now what we do see is that there is around 15% of those men who are diagnosed with an eating disorder are from the gay population. 15%. That's not exactly a majority.
Right.
So now the uh, is that slightly higher than the population of gay individuals in the general population? Yes. So that we can say that those who are in the gay community do have a higher expectation for high definition of their muscles and their of beauty standards and what have you. There is a greater expectation and pressure, which probably does significantly drive the eating disorder behaviors to begin with. But again, this is still a genetic disease that, maybe diet behavior starts them down the path due to body image concerns. But again, it then just picks up, because it's a genetic disease.
Right.
The body seems to feel better or just numbed out or whatever due to the, behaviors that they're doing, whether it's purging or compulsive exercising or use of performance enhancing drugs or binge behavior, whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm going to try to keep this organized, but I have like 1,000 questions for you.
Yeah, so. I'm sorry. Hit me. I'll try to stay with you.
No, you're doing wonderfully. I think your story is so perfect for helping to understand all of these questions that I have and that many people do have about men who struggle with eating disorders. So, as you know, or I think you remember, I was at the Center for Change conference that you spoke at. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I knew your story and thought of you. And I know you've shared your story hundreds of times at this point, but do you have like a 20-minute little spiel you can give us about kind of, I mean, I know there's so much to it. Now that I finished your book, I'm like, wow, there's even more than I heard at the conference, but, right. And I can kind of prompt you along the way of some interesting points, but, just kind of tell us how you were raised, how that influenced your views of yourself and food and how that contributed to where you are now.
So I remember the first time that food became a way that I comforted myself. It was when my parents separated and divorced. I was, young, 4 years old, 5 years old. And I have those first memories of sneaking downstairs to the kitchen to hoard and consume large quantities of Hershey's Kisses or Chips Ahoy cookies or ice cream or handfuls of Frosted Flakes, whatever I could get my hands on, and feeling more relaxed because of it. Those are those early memories. And those behaviors became more compulsive as I got older and my family started to really break apart. My parents were divorced by the time I was 5 or 6, and then soon after my brother left home, and the next year my sister left home, and it was just myself and my mother who very much struggled with her own issues of mental health and being a single mom and working very hard on her professional career as an extremely well-respected psychologist and academic and writer and very, very busy person, but also struggling with her own illness. So I basically, left alone, went even further into self-soothing with food. That's when I started getting bullied. And that's when I started getting bullied by my own family, in fact, that I was the only kid, I was the only person in the family who was now, as one family member said, I was an embarrassment to the family due to my size. So down the path of my first diets. And so I'm loathing myself, I'm loathing my body, and starting to diet and getting those high fives and attaboys and Hey, you're looking good. Look at that. Your stomach is nice and flat, and how great that is. Until the next moment where I felt depressed again and struggling and turned back to food, as we all do, from time to time. But mine became very compulsive. So throughout my childhood, I was basically doing the yo-yo dieting thing, the same that you would see, among many young girls now, not realizing that nobody picked up that these major fluctuations in weight might have been a sign of something. Until I was a senior in high school, when I was at my heaviest, and my father, out of loving concern, my father being a physician, decided that he needed to help me take control of my weight problem and put me on a medically supervised, very low-calorie diet with the expectation if I didn't lose the appropriate amount of weight that he decided was appropriate, I would not get the child support for that month for my basic needs. Now, again, he thought he was giving me a carrot and a stick. All I thought was, I'm an embarrassment to my father, and I'm going to show him how much that I'm going to beat this. And I went into an anorexic state where he had me on a very low-calorie diet, and I said, well, I can eat even less than that. And then I ate less than that. And down I went down the rabbit hole. Feeling really kind of good about myself because of all the kudos and high fives. Again, if I see a young woman in my practice now who drops the kind of weight that I did, granted I was not, at a quote unquote unhealthy weight, but I saw someone drop the amount that I did, that would be scary. But nobody saw that for me, and all I got was approval.
Well, and you can be starving at any weight.
Absolutely. I absolutely was. And I was compulsively exercising.
Right.
I was on the varsity swim team. I was on the varsity soccer team. I was on the varsity baseball team. I was a very good athlete, but I was not performing well because, hey, I'm starved.
No energy.
No energy. Nobody could understand, what was going on. So finally, I went to college, and originally went to the University of Maryland, and that's when I flipped the script again, and I went back to binge behavior. And this is for me, and I think for most eating disorder cases that I see in an outpatient basis, it's a game of whack-a-mole. Knock down anorexia, and up comes bulimia. Knock down bulimia, out goes BED. And that was my experience.
I think people don't quite understand that. They want to put someone in a category and say, well, you're anorexic, so
right.
That means that you don't eat. And
right.
This other person over here is a binge eater, and
right.
That means that they're just a glutton, and they don't care, and they just eat tons of food. So
right.
I think it's really important for people to understand that these are very dynamic issues, and that one leads to another, which leads to another, and it's all kind of the same thing. And I don't know if that's fair to say, but
I think that's extremely accurate. Not even more than fair, actually.
Okay, thanks.
The hardest part was I thought this was all normal. I saw it happen in my own family.
Right.
I saw friends of mine, we would go out and hit Bob's Big Boy on a Saturday night at midnight because that's when the breakfast buffet started. And so we'd starve ourselves the whole day before, binge, and see how many plates we could stack up of, food, and then starve ourselves the next day and compulsively exercise to get it out of us.
And that
not
was
knowing
you with
that
a group of men, boys.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Four guys, we're all, high school seniors, and but this is normal. And I
Right.
talk to most of the males who come to me. This is the norm. They go and compulsively exercise, all of them, all doing the same nonsense. Binging and then starving and compulsively exercising because their body image is so important. And somehow we say that that's just what guys do. But no, they're so overwhelmed with their insecurities. And this binge behavior is just a manifestation of acting out those insecurities.
And I think before you were going to say something about if I see a woman losing the type of weight I lost, we're very worried. But with a man, we just somehow write it off like, well, that's okay.
He's getting in shape.
Yes.
That's what we say.
Yes.
Not a big deal until that particular man is at a scary weight where we see their bone structure or something like that, or they have, they're passing out. I've got, a teacher who's a friend. This year alone, this past school year, he had 3 kids in his college class who just passed out in class. 3 young 19-year-old, 18-year-old men just passing out because they're not eating. And boy, and nobody's going to make heads or tails of it, except that he happens to be this is like Psych 101. He's a social worker himself, and so he knew what this was, but they're not going to do anything about it because they think this is normal.
Right.
That's what is just so tough. There's so much stigma and misinformation. And that's exactly, again, that was my experience. And it wasn't until much later, after I'd done so much more damage to my body. I mean, I think about my binge behavior starting at around 10, lasting, into anorexic behavior and compulsive exercise behavior in my 20s, where, I'm so ashamed of my weight and my body. I started compulsively running while I was also restricting again. And this compulsive running led to getting a lot of pain in my left hip. But the pain didn't matter. I had to keep running because the belief in my head was the moment I stop, I'm going to balloon out and become this grotesque blob that nobody could love. And so I ran through the pain and I kept going until I could no longer walk. And then I decided I better go see a doctor. And then the doctor did a CT scan and an MRI scan and said, look, you're bone on bone in your left hip and you're 24 years old. You got to stop running. So my crazy brain said, well, if I can't be as thin as I want, then I will be as big as I can be. So I became a compulsive lifter. And so I was going to get big and ripped. And what do? I hit the gym with some friends and guys who are just there working their show off muscles. And I compulsively lift until I'm having, diminishing returns. I'm no longer able to do the overhead press at the weight I was. Why am I failing? Why is my shoulder aching all the time? Why is my shoulder aching and waking me up in the middle of the night? Turns out I've managed to, rip my rotator cuff and labrum in both shoulders. And I was not going to stop. I was so desperate to look better. Then when I realized I can't do that anymore, out of despondency, I returned right back to the binge eating. And that became my eating disorder for the next several years. And as I got bigger and my shame grew more, it derailed my music career in Nashville.
I was going to say, and it's interesting. It's an interesting detail for the listeners to understand is that you would we call it, dropped out of college and went to Berkeley
Yeah,
in
so I was
Boston. Yeah.
yeah, I
So
was at the University of
explain that.
Maryland.
Oh,
So I was University of Maryland College Park, and then transferred to dropped out due to depression and my eating disorder and substance use. And um, after about a year and a half and getting treated for my depression, though my eating disorder did not change, very important to recognize, just because you have a mental illness treated does not mean the eating disorder goes away. Um, got did very well musically and managed to get into Berklee College of Music, which is,
a big
you know,
deal.
big deal, one of the biggest, most prestigious music schools in the world. And I graduated magna cum laude. I mean, I was really doing well for a while. And I went to Nashville with dreams of being, a professional musician and singer songwriter, and put out a record in 1998. And one of the songs got into a movie, and some other songs that I had were recorded by other people, and I was just starting to take off. And then the self-doubt and the self-loathing and the body image and the everything else came crumbling down, and I spiraled into my binge behavior. And that's finally, the story really gets even more complicated with my, thank goodness I'm now 15 and a half years into a wonderful marriage. And my wife, really helped stabilize me as much as she could. And we had a beautiful baby boy named George. But George's health was so precarious. We didn't know if he was going to live. And all I had left at my disposal emotionally was my eating disorder. And that's when I hit my rock bottom. He was about a year old.
Okay, so can you tell us the story? Because I think this is a really, I don't know what word to use. I think it's funny in some ways, and it's entertaining, but it's also just so tragic. Your story of your poker story.
The poker story. All right.
Would you say that that's the moment? Is that the moment you were talking about? Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely, that's the moment. So, when I left the music industry when my son was born to become a stay-at-home dad and help take care of him.
Because your boss told you to choose between.
Right. I was a music critic for a daily paper, as well as still writing, songs for other people and what have you. And my editor, my boss said, "You got to choose your son or your job." And I said, "See ya." And left that same day. Became a stay-at-home dad to take care of my kid, and my wife worked her tail off to make sure we try to stay afloat. And I was working a part-time job at night. I was going to graduate school as a social worker at night as well. Working, taking care of George, who every day we were worried whether or not he was going to be alive or not. He's on oxygen full time. He's got a feeding tube. He's got, I think about it. It's just, I try not to think about it anymore because he's doing so well now.
Which is the great part of it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Keep an eye out. He might be a drummer in the future on some mate's band. Oh. He's a heck of a musician.
Oh, that is the cutest. I love that. And how old is he now?
George is 13 going on 21.
I love it. We'll talk more about George when we I loved what you said in the book where you said, I try to help people learn how to eat foods who are scared to eat foods that you really love. And he feels so cool. Like, yeah, I got it.
Absolutely. He's got it now.
I love that.
We can sit at a Mexican restaurant and watch him chow down on 2 chicken enchiladas and Mexican rice and remember that he didn't even eat solid foods till he was 7.
Yeah.
And just marvel at it. And it's, just, he we'll get to him.
Yeah, we'll get
Anyway,
to that. I'm excited
we'll
to
get
hear
to
your
him.
thoughts on that.
So I'm in this poker game, bunch of music industry guys, and there's one of the guys is an amazing barbecue chef. Wins a bunch of awards in Tennessee, which is saying something.
Yeah, that is definitely.
And so he had made a big tray of these wings on this particular night, and I had had a bad day. A lot of deadlines for the newspaper. For my part-time job was also as a columnist. For school, had a fight with my wife. I needed this game, and I blew all of my money, in 45 minutes. Just played badly and didn't care, and everybody was like, "Oh, let me throw you $20. Let me throw you, stay in the game." But I'm so filled with shame and personal rage. I say no, just very black and white in my thinking, and decide I'm going to calm down by eating some wings. So I go into the kitchen, and there's this tray of 70, 80, 100 wings. I don't even know. And I just start eating the first one, and I really felt like my shoulders dropped as I started to eat it. The meat's just falling right off the bone. The cartilage pops off the top, and I'm crunching on that. It's just like jam all over my face, from the sauce, and it's fantastic. And so I go to the next one, and the next one was just as good. And then the next one. I realized sometime later that I'd become dissociative. I lost track of space and time. And as I'm starting to come to, the reason I'm coming to is because I feel pain in my stomach and my chest. There's so much food that I've consumed that I'm to the point of significant discomfort. And I look down, there's 6 wings left. And I hear in my brain this voice saying, have another. And I don't want to have another. I'm done. I'm in pain. But I feel compelled to eat the rest of these. And I'm crying. I really don't want to do this, but I'm just out of control. And I eat the next one, and I take that last one in, and I'm fighting with everything I've got, but my arm continues to go up to my mouth, and I eat it. And I look down at this tray of congealed fat and call myself every horrible name in the book. I don't even say goodbye to my friends. I just skulk out the door. And I go home, and I cry most of the way home, and I tell my wife, she sees I'm distraught, and I tell her what I did and how awful I am as a person. And again, why we're together all these years later is there's no judgment at all. And we decided that I have an eating disorder and I've got to get help. So I looked up, treatment, eating disorders treatment, Nashville, and found the Eating Disorders Network of Tennessee, or the Coalition of Tennessee, EDCT. And your guest last week was Reba Sloan. And Reba became my dietitian, and I had a therapist, and I began my journey to understand what an eating disorder was, how I developed it, what my root causes are, and that it was not going to happen overnight. And boy, it's been a long journey.
Yeah.
It's been a long journey.
Wow. Okay.
I would say I struggled for 20 years before I owned I had an eating disorder and started to work on it.
Okay. One thing you mentioned in the book that I think is really interesting is, when you were just talking about the tray of wings and the voice, the eating disorder voice in your head, you kind of talked about how that was all of the comments, the shaming comments from family and bullies at school and whoever else about body image and which foods are good and which foods are bad, kind of all embodied in one thing, I don't know what to call it.
One
source,
belief,
one belief, one voice in your head. And that's where the drive to binge kind of came from, was that voice or that belief that you weren't good enough.
Absolutely. Because what would happen when I would eat, the voice would go away. It would come right back as soon as I was done. But for the moment that I was using food, it was gone. And just the same, when I went into significant restriction or compulsive exercise mode, those beliefs and those voices were quieter. And so what is the power of an eating disorder? It's to assert control over your crazy. I love what Tom Rutledge, did when he, with Jenny Schaefer, really coined the phrase ED. And I really, I like that. I've got many men who will call it Ed or Anna or
Will you
Mia.
just explain that, like, just in case someone who's listening doesn't understand?
So Ed is essentially the personification of your eating disorder voice. How do you differentiate Ed from your own thoughts and needs? I think it's real simple. Would you say to a little kid, little boy or little girl, any of the things that you say to yourself? And if the answer is no, like, oh, you're fat, or, if you don't lose weight, nobody will love you. If you wouldn't say that to a little kid, then there's a reason you wouldn't, because you know better. You have a different belief. Ed is the one who's saying it. So I differentiate Ed. It's what's called intrapersonal therapy is the actual, term. And, for men, they may call it Anna, they may call it Mia. I've had someone call it Fred. I had someone call it Steve because someone who had abused them was named Steve, and they recognized the correlation.
And there's a great book about that called Life Without Ed by Jenny Schaefer. So.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. Well, I just want to get to some of the lessons learned and the things that you work with others on. So you talk about some of these core issues in your book of belonging, perfectionism, control, identity, independence, insecurity, and probably many more. And I'm just curious if you would elaborate on one or two of your favorites in that list of kind of what helped you get help and get better.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite tools actually is what I coined my 8-point constellation of healthy behaviors. If you can imagine drawing a circle and then dividing it up into 8 slices of pie. And each slice represents a healthy behavior. So it's physical health, emotional health, spiritual health, work or academic life, family, then friends, then personal development, and then joy and adventure. And when people start to shade in how much energy and effort they're putting into filling that slice of pie, each one of those elements, they start to draw a really disfigured circle. And I tell them, look, if this was the wheel of your car, how smooth a ride do you think you're going to have?
That's a good point.
And they would go, oh, God, it would be terrible. And I'd say, yeah. And with your terrible ride, don't you think you'd be looking for some comfort from something? Well, that's probably your eating disorder or your substance abuse or whatever combination of things you're doing. Don't we want to smooth the ride out? And if invariably for most men, work is shaded really far out, it's kind of like the nail in the tire. And so we got to pull the nail out. We've got to take some of the energy that they put there and put it into, something else, whether it's emotional health. They, might also be like off the charts because they're so hyper focused on, exercise and healthy behaviors. They're orthorexic, belief that they have to eat perfectly and righteously. So we get some of the energy out of that, put it into these other areas, find as smooth a circle as we can create over a period of time. And when they can visualize that, and we do that exercise again, say 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, and they start to see that as balanced. A, it takes less energy to try and hold it all together. And B, the necessity of their eating disorder is lessened. They like their lives better. They like themselves better. Their relationships are healthier. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. That sense of belonging is so powerful.
Yes.
And I think another tool that I really advocacy to create a awareness and feel like you belong to something is so powerful. For myself, when I got into treatment and I started to go to these national events and talks and what have you for eating disorder sufferers, because again, I was not a clinician. I was just a grad student with an active eating disorder. I was the only guy there, except for some dads who were supporting their daughters. And I felt so disconnected and alone. And yet again, even in my disease, I'm an aberration. And how awful that felt. And nobody was talking about binge eating disorder, which was really my primary eating disorder at the end. You've got to feel like you belong, that you're not some weirdo with this strange disease. And I love the fact that there's more and more awareness being drawn to binge eating disorder and that people can connect with each other in a meaningful way, that this is not a lesser disorder or a gluttony disorder or whatever. It's you belong to something. This is legitimate. And I really, that's so powerful. And at the same time, men have to work to create that environment, which is exactly why I joined, the board for the National Association for Males with Eating Disorders. It's amazing to be able to work not only with these researchers from around the world, the country and the world, who are studying this and writing about it, but to hear the people who are contacting us through the website and hear their stories of both tragedy and recovery, it just normalizes the whole experience. And all I want for anybody who struggles is to feel like they belong, that they're, again, be a part of a tribe of like-minded individuals. And that's where that collective power and accountability makes all the difference.
I love that. Yeah. That sense of belonging is so powerful, whether it's about food or any other part of our life. That's what we're made to do, if you think about it, right? We're needed to evolve to be in a tribe and to be a part of something. It's a really important thing. So
if it takes a community to raise a child, imagine what it takes to recover from an eating disorder.
Yes, so true. Yes. So more on that, more on your recovery story. There's lots of therapy, years with working with a dietitian. What would you say recovery looks like for you now? I mean, let's set a realistic expectation or a realistic picture of what it looks like to be a human being who's been through something like that.
This is where I love using my son as a
Okay,
model. All
awesome.
right,
Love
so
it.
here's a kid who, due to major health complications, had to have a feeding tube because his heart could not sustain the energy to both feed and swallow and breathe at the same time. So, never having any expectation or natural understanding of food and eating and texture and hunger or satiety or anything until he was 7 years old and he just started to eat solid foods and drink from an open cup. And now he's 13. We'll go out to dinner, and he will eat until and love his food. I mean, he will love his food. I love spicy foods, or I love the way this rice feels in my mouth, and he like enjoys it, right? Yeah, there's no more fear, there's no more anxiety, and he'll just stop out of nowhere, go, I'm full. But you were just loving it. You were loving your
Amazing.
food. And you're done? Yeah, I'm done. And it's time for, do you want dessert? No, I'm good. Get home. Hey, Dad, can I have a chocolate chip cookie? I'm ready now. Sure. Now, other kids, would they go and say, can I have 4? Yeah. We don't put any unnatural boundaries. He has one, and he goes, oh, that's so good, and he enjoys it, and then he's done. Really? He says, do you want another, George? No, I'm good. Wow, total insightfulness, right?
Yes, that's
Now, for the
amazing.
rest of us who are recovering from an eating disorder, not just a feeding disorder like my son had, where there's all of this ingrained body shame
Or disordered eating,
and
or not even a
or
full-blown eating
right,
disorder.
absolutely,
Yeah.
anything along the spectrum, and there's all this body shame and I should or I shouldn't, and I can't listen to my body because I have to meet some kind of external, image and expectation. We're constantly obsessing about it, and if we don't get the food we want, we're going to be disappointed. If we eat too much, we're going to be shaming. For the rest of us, to be like my son now is learning a second language. And I think the person who really said this best was Karen Koenig in her book The Rules of Normal Eating, which was one of the first books I ever read in my journey into recovery. It's learning a second language that you speak maybe 95% fluently. You'll never be a native speaker, but you'll learn how to converse well. And so there are days when I clearly am not being mindful. There are days where, I let work get in the way of eating lunch, and then I'm starving at the end of the day, and I'll eat more than I intend to for dinner. But there's no shame at all, because I've done the work that allowed me to say, this doesn't really affect my body. This doesn't really change who I am. This doesn't affect my ability as a therapist. This doesn't affect my ability as a father or a husband or any other way I define myself, musician, whatever. And it's okay to let it go. And I think that ultimately is what recovery looks like. To me, to say I'm recovered doesn't mean somebody else looks at it and goes, well, that's not exactly normal eating. No. I like what Reba said is Reba Sloan said, everything in moderation, including moderation. And that was one of the first things she taught me. And I still live by that credo. And so I just let it go. And that to me is the normal life. That's what recovery looks like.
So that's the difference, is you might have been able to improve your eating behaviors or patterns and maybe not really fully say, yeah, I'm in recovery, until you were able to get rid of the shame and the guilt associated with your eating behaviors. Is that what you'd say was kind of the line, or was
I
there
believe so. For me, like Carolyn Costin writes in her book, 8 Keys to Recovery. She's got sort of 10 stages of recovery, and the 10th stage is basically my reinterpretation of it is, oh well, oh well, and I move on.
Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you don't have a moment where your behavior might be a little different than your typical. But it's just, it doesn't have any emotional connection anymore.
Yeah.
You're not doing it to manipulate anything. It just, life got in the way. I didn't have a good balance today. And
I'm hearing a lot of becoming okay with not being perfect, feeling pressure
that's
to be perfect.
The key. Right. Perfection, there's healthy perfection and there's unhealthy perfection. And unhealthy perfection is feeling that the only way is if its behavior has 100% success. I think healthy perfection is I'm giving it my best effort at any particular given time. And if it doesn't work out, I gave it my best effort at that particular time.
Yes.
That's, I think, a reasonable thing.
I do too. I like that. I really like that outlook. I wanted to ask a little bit about your conversations, your difficult conversations you've had with family members as you've become a therapist and really gotten into this world of eating disorder recovery for yourself and for your clients. And you talk in your book about how your family members are doing, and difficult conversations you've had to have just to kind of work with them and teach them about healthy body image and healthy expectations and food and all of these different things. I'm curious about what you want to share about that, and then also maybe what you would recommend, if you could just sit someone down and say, look, this is what you need to know about food, weight, body image, eating disorders, all this stuff, what would you say?
Well, with family, it's always complicated because it's a deep, culturally ingrained belief system. And belief systems like that are not easy to change. I need specific from family members about what I need differently in terms of language, and they don't always adhere to it. But the more I challenged them, the ones who really love me, who really want my story to be a part of their story now, they have tried. Now, do they slip up and say things that are thoughtless or triggering or what have you, that are body image focused and thin, obsessional? Yeah, unfortunately, it's still the world that they live in with all of their peers, while I live in a bubble of eating disorder recovery. It is what it is. You can continually ask for what you need, though, and that's what I ask my clients as they work on their own recovery and they choose to put into their life those people who have their back, essentially. I've had to put some significant boundaries on family members who just didn't get it, though. And that's a reality check. Doesn't mean I cut them out forever, but it means I have to put healthy boundaries up.
Which is a very healthy and grown-up thing to learn how to do.
It really is.
Boundaries are important.
Very important. And I think it's the hardest part of recovery. I think the behaviors are recoverable, but the relationships that drove you into them, that's why family-based therapy, I think, is so successful, because you're teaching the whole family, the whole system, how to recover. And I think that's why it's so hard for adults to recover, because family often is not involved. I had a friend. You said the question was kind of like, if you had to sit somebody down and you tell them about your thoughts on weight and eating disorders, what have you. I have a friend who messaged me on Facebook just an hour ago, and she had her brother-in-law about a month ago suddenly died at age 42 of a heart attack. And it's her identical twin sister's husband who passed. They're very close. Everybody's been grieving. And a lot of emotional eating going on. She texted me and said she thought of me and what I would have said to her, because she was about to go sign up for another weight loss program, another Weight Watchers or Jenny Craig or whatever. And she thought, I'd rather just be mindful, and whatever will be, will be. And she just basically said, thank you for being in my head.
Oh.
And I said, oh, that's a very dangerous, but okay. We've talked about it, this whole phenomenon of don't buy into thinness will make you happy. Don't buy into the expectation of health only comes at one size. Be mindful and let your body go to where it naturally needs to be. And that is essentially what Health at Every Size, which is I think the most effective treatment model for binge eating disorder.
And I'll link to some information about that on the website for people to be able to reference that.
So, and that Health at Every Size does not mean that, we want everybody to be, comfortable with 600 pounds. It means that we want everyone to say, I'm in charge of my own health.
You can't look at me and know what my health is like just by looking at me.
You can't tell.
Yeah.
And for me, health is not a physical state. It's a combination of physical, emotional, and spiritual. And when you have those in balance, cool. Doesn't mean your body's going to be disease-free. It means you've got a life worth living.
Right.
So that's where I come back to for everybody.
And I think I would just add too, I think some people get their sense of identity or self-worth from feeling better than people if they are thinner than them. And then on the other side, get their self-loathing from not feeling like they are as thin or as fit as other people. And all of that is just completely flawed thinking. We need to be more than our bodies. There's more
Absolutely.
to us than the way our bodies look. And it's just not fair to reduce ourselves down to a number on a scale. That's just not fair.
Absolutely. A number on a scale or a clothing size off the rack. Or for most guys, what's interesting is the notch on their belt buckle. So absolutely.
So is there anything else that you would add about men and how, I guess I'm curious kind of on a larger perspective, what can women and men do to support the men and boys in our lives? Maybe changing up some of the things that we do now as a culture. Should we remember that boys are just as sensitive, or potentially could be just as sensitive to the things that we're saying about weight and body image and food? But in general, what can we do to support these men and boys in our lives better?
So here's the first recognition of that. Let's go back to the days when Betty Ford first opened, and that she was advocating for the fact the addictions community thought most addictions happened in men. And she helped to raise awareness and change the expectation and understanding that addictions do not differentiate by gender. Everybody is susceptible. The field of eating disorders is just making that turn now. That eating disorders are not gender-based. So first off, let's take that out of the equation. Everybody is susceptible. Now, if genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger, we have to create an environment that does not objectify males, that does not put males in a box of expectations of you must be strong, you must be emotionless, you must be rational and dogmatic, and any other sort of male expectation that we are all fall within a spectrum. And we have to allow ourselves some breathing room to be emotional and sharing and individuals. Don't tell your kiddo, your son, you gotta, man up, toughen up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't cry. All those things that are very sort of Western cultural expectation. Who says that is what masculinity is? If you look at South American culture, Central American culture, you look at in Spain, in the Middle East, in Italy, male expectation of what is connection and brotherhood and emotional expression are so different from what we're used to. We have to allow for those possibilities as well. So it's not that we are supposed to be more sensitive. Guess what? We are sensitive. We got to stop shutting down. And just like we had to recognize how we are objectifying the female form, we have objectified the male form ever more so in the last 10, 20 years, where, guys are, in, what was it? The increase in performance-enhancing drugs has gone up exponentially over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Not because more and more, high school juniors and seniors and college kids are competing at higher levels of sports, but because they want to look like the guys in the magazines and on the videos. So I think with that, we have to recognize that if our son or our husband or whoever in our life, brother, is engaging in disordered eating patterns, you have to ask yourself, if this were a woman doing these behaviors, would I be concerned? You need to make sure that we're not saying, well, boys will be boys. They like to do this or they like to do that, and I'm glad it's a boy. I'm glad it's not my daughter that's doing that. That's not fair. It's not okay for anyone to be engaging in these behaviors, regardless of gender. I've got some more than adequate evidence to say that it's also not a boy issue, it's a male issue. Got a 50-something-year-old gentleman who will, with a history of abusing, phentermine and caffeine pills and metformin and compulsive exercise and restriction behaviors all at the same time in an effort to be thinner. But it's not just about being thinner. For him, he wants the energy that it gives him so that he can work all day and then compulsively exercise all night.
Wow.
I mean, this is how it morphs and manifests, and it's so very, very different. So this is tough stuff.
Well, I'll let you get going with your day, but I just wanted to let all the listeners know about the book that you wrote. It's called Man Up to Eating Disorders, and I will link to that. Is the best place for them to check that out or purchase it on Amazon? Is that the best?
Amazon, if they want to get an electronic copy, they can get it off iTunes or Barnes & Noble. They can also get an electronic copy on Amazon, and the paperback is only available on Amazon.
Okay, great. Well, I read it, and it is wonderful. Like I said, I just enjoyed every page. It was a page turner for me.
Yay!
So is there anything else that you would add? Or I guess I'd like to close with you just kind of telling us what matters to you these days about nutrition and health, because that's kind of what the theme of this podcast is, to talk about what really matters with nutrition and health.
Again, I think I would reframe health is not just a physical state. It's the combination of physical and emotional and spiritual balance. Spiritual meaning is not about, frou-frou-ness or religion or higher power, which it can be, but spirituality comes from spiritus, which means where does strength come from? Connection. So for me, it's about feeling connected to something outside of yourself, greater than yourself, your community, your understanding of God, your, whatever, your family, what have you. So all of those aspects have to be taken into account. And you don't beat an eating disorder on your own. You do it with a community and with support. And for nutrition, my understanding of what is healthy nutrition is that you don't label foods. You listen to your body. My brain, I never believed, could say, I think I want salad, and I actually learned, I really crave salad sometimes, not every time, but that I also can crave a slice of key lime pie and go, ooh, yeah, that's good stuff. So for me, it's becoming in touch and in tune with your body's needs and wants, and
honoring that.
Learning to be and honor it and be a little less afraid.
I could not agree more. That's so great. Thank you so much for participating in this and for sharing your story and for being brave enough to write that book and let us really see what your progression was like. It's just really amazing resource. I'm going to recommend it to anybody who might benefit. So thank you.
Thank you, Paige. It's really a pleasure to speak with you today.
Okay. Well, have a good one.
You too.
All right.
Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.